You do not strike the woman who gave you life. Not in this place.
Get that woman out of here. She's not welcome. She's nobody. That was the first thing the world heard. Cold, sharp, and unforgettable. A wedding full of gold, chandeliers pouring with crystals, and rows of high society people looking at the altar like they were watching a royal coronation. In the middle, Beckett Monroe, the wealthy CEO of Finrise Global, stood tall in a white Armani tuxedo with his jaw set and eyes burning. The cameras were on. The press was all over the place. This was supposed to be the best wedding of the decade. And then it did. He raised his fist and hit his mother. The boom broke through the cathedral like a bolt of lightning, making even the choir stop singing. A gasp went across the marble aisle. His mother, an older woman in a worn white dress who was very weak, fell back, holding her cheek with one hand, yet her gaze never left his face. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stood there, broken. Someone else was also still in the shadows of the fancy wedding. A server, young, black. She was almost invisible to the crowd, but her peaceful beauty shone through. What is her name? Amara Fields. She wore a modest black uniform and had a tray of champagne shaking in her hands. Her curls were neatly tucked under a cap, and her warm, steady eyes were locked on the guy who had just hit the mother who raised him. The moment stopped, and that's when it changed. For a brief moment, Beckett saw something in Amara's eyes that money could never buy. Shame. Not the sort that comes from cameras or transactions that fall through, but the kind that makes you feel bad when you realize you've become the worst version of yourself. And that's when he fell to his knees. Not for the bride, not for the people watching, but he didn't even know the girl's name. At that moment, the world witnessed more than simply a controversy. It saw a mirror, and a black narrative sprang to life in that mirror. A story about color, class, pride, and the strength of a lady that everyone had been told to ignore. This isn't just a play. This isn't simply going viral. This is hidden worth. People we don't pay attention to occasionally have the truth we need the most. Before we tell you how a waitress made a millionaire fall, not just from grace but to the ground, do this for yourself. Click subscribe. Stay with us. This narrative will make you feel something you forgot you had. And if you've ever felt like no one saw you in a room full of authority, this is your tale. Beckett Monroe was more than just rich. He was prosperous because of his family. The kind of man whose name was known in boardrooms even before he got there. At the age of 34, he had already been on the pages of Fortune, Time, and GQ. He was praised as the visionary who built Finrise Global into a trillion-dollar business before he ever got his MBA. Where does he live? A glass house in Beverly Hills that looked out over Los Angeles like a king looks out over his domain. His life? Made to fit, under control, planned. Beckett didn't simply fall in love when it came to marriage. He made a merger. Sienna Hathaway was her name. She was everything the tabloids loved. She was blonde, beautiful, and the only child of Senator Raymond Hathaway, one of South Carolina's most prominent men. She went to Yale, speaks Italian fluently, and has been a part of charity galas since she was 16. Beckett and Sienna were a perfect couple in the eyes of the world. Smart and beautiful, power and money, the last union. The ceremony? There was never any love. It was a stage. The event took place at Charleston's oldest cathedral, which was a sign of wealth. Months before the event, gold-trimmed invitations were sent out, each one hand-delivered with a unique wax seal. There were a lot of famous people, politicians, CEOs, and people who have a lot of power around the world in the pews. They didn't come to see a wedding. They arrived to see a show. The cathedral was a work of art in and of itself. It had oak pews that were over 100 years old, stained glass windows that were 20 feet tall, and a marble altar that came from Italy. The cobblestone roadway outside was full of Rolls-Royces. Inside, a full orchestra played a brand new piece of music that had been written specifically for this day. Everything was just right. Not Beckett. He looked perfect when he stood at the altar. His white tuxedo suited him like a second skin, and every hair was in place. But beneath the custom smile and diamond cufflinks was a man who was holding his breath. Not because I'm scared, but there is no place for mistakes in perfection. and Beckett Monroe had spent his whole life trying to avoid the aspects of himself that weren't ideal. He was only 7 when his father died. Isabel Monroe, his mother, raised him on her own. She worked 3 jobs and still found time to help him with his homework every night. She put his meal in old supermarket bags. Every Sunday, he walked to church. He missed meals so he could eat. Beckett's mother didn't fit into the polished picture he was making as he moved up the ranks of top prep schools, Ivy League halls, and global tech summits. She was overly modest, too old, too real. So he put her in the backdrop. And today, at his wedding, which was the biggest event of his public life, he made sure she wasn't on the list of guests. Not because he didn't like her, but he thought she didn't go with the furniture. And then there was Sienna. Sienna was fire, and Beckett was ice. Not a warm fire, but a regulated fire. The kind that costs $1 million and is behind glass in a fireplace. She could pose for any camera, smile just perfectly for any investor, and adjust her accent depending on the room. But even she didn't know how deep the break in Beckett's psyche was. Everyone was looking at her as she walked down the aisle in her handmade Vera Wang dress. Reporters spoke into small microphones. Drones flew above like robotic birds. Guests dabbed their eyes like they were in a movie. And Beckett? He stood there, still, good-looking, and empty. Then the doors creaked open once more. Not in the script. People looked. Whispers got louder. There was an older woman in a white outfit that had faded. Her hands shook. Her eyes sparkled. No makeup, no gems. There was just love all across her wrinkled face. It was his mom. She wasn't invited. There was no driver, no dress code, and no place saved for her in the front pew. But she still came. Because that's what mothers do. Beckett's jaw got tight. He thought there were just seconds left before she ruined everything. The future for him, his picture, his well-planned excellence. And that's when he did it. He walked down the aisle. He stood in front of her. He uttered those things. "Get that woman out of here. She's not welcome. She's nobody." Then he lifted his hand. The next thing that happened was history. But a slap doesn't make history happen. When the hidden is eventually seen, history changes. And at that point, when there was stillness, when the waitress looked at him, and when his mother's hand shook, the story ceased being about a wedding, and began to change into something different. Something real. Something to keep in mind. This isn't simply the upper class breaking apart. This is a black narrative that reminds us all of what happens when we forget who helped us before we could help ourselves. And if you believe this narrative ends here, stay tight. Because the woman who changes everything hasn't even said anything yet. Nobody at the wedding knew her name, which was Amara Fields. People called her the Help. She walked between tables like air, quietly and without being seen, being sure not to bump into the $1 million outfits or splash champagne on the senators. She had learned to smile just enough, talk just enough, and go when the tray was empty. But Amara didn't grow up without being seen. She was the youngest of 4 girls and was born in Savannah, Georgia. Her mom called her Sunbeam because she always smiled, even when circumstances were horrible. A smile that made people feel protected, that maybe everything would be good. But that smile had been put to the test. She lost her father to heart failure when she was 15. She worked 2 jobs when she was 17 to help pay for food. At 21, she was in Charleston with a degree in hospitality. She worked at fancy events carrying trays as her classmates tweeted pictures of their graduation from Ivy League institutions. She was smart, she was able. But she was also black, and in some rooms, it meant she was always the last person to be noticed and the first to be ignored. But on that day, she came to work with her distinctive grin, her natural curls neatly put up in a bun, her posture graceful, and her clothing pristine. She was the only black person working as a server. Nobody said it out loud, though. But she knew it. The other servers took the trays from the front as she went to the rear to fill them up. Guests looked away from her but stared at the white servers long enough to recall their names. Even though she had worked for that catering company for 2 years, security double-checked her credentials. Amara, on the other hand, stayed calm. She knows how to get around rooms that didn't want her there. Until it occurred. The hit. That noise echoed through the church like a bullet breaking through a window. She let go of a champagne glass. No one saw. But her eyes, those deep, almond-shaped eyes, were fixed on the altar. A man wearing a tuxedo, a woman wearing an ancient dress. A hand went up, a broken heart. She felt something twist in her chest. It wasn't only the brutality. It was the quiet that came after it. Nobody moved, not a single person spoke, not even the bride. People kept going about their business as if a mother's shame wasn't worth stopping for. But Amara couldn't take her eyes off of her. She saw herself in that old woman. Not literally, but in a way that means something. They both went into an area where they weren't really welcome. Both of them had gone into places that were meant to ignore them. And they both knew what it was like to be there yet not be seen. That's when Beckett turned around. His gaze moved throughout the room, looking for power, searching for the next part of the show. And then he looked her in the eye. He had no idea who she was. He didn't care. But in that little moment, something in her face hit him more than any word could. She wasn't crying. She wasn't making a face. She merely stared at him, truly stared at him, as if to say, "What you just did, that's who you really are." Beckett stopped moving. There was no sound louder than that kind of quiet judgment. Amara's eyes held no blame or hate, just disappointment. And for some reason that hurt the most. He looked down, and for a time the air felt different. The slap didn't matter anymore. It was about what he had become to defend what he had made. He had it all. Cash, fame, strength. But he had lost the one thing that money can't buy. The right to be proud of who he is. Amara, on the other hand, didn't say a word. She didn't want to be noticed. Her body just moved on its own as she gently walked past the guests who were gasping and the cameras that were frozen and reached the altar. She got down on her knees. Not before the groom, but in front of his mom, and helped her pick up the petals that had fallen from her bouquet. No one else did, not even the bride. And when she helped the shaking elderly woman get up, the church that had been so frigid now felt warmer. Because one woman, who wasn't supposed to be seen, reminded everyone of something we all forget. Status has nothing to do with dignity. It exists in small things, strength in silence, courage in silence. From then on, Amara Fields was more than just a waitress. She was the lady who brought a billionaire to his knees, not with force, but with truth. For over 15 minutes, no one noticed she was there. There were a lot of people in the cathedral. The walls were golden, and laughter bounced off of them. The strings played well together. Silver flutes held champagne. In the background, cameras whirred softly. The ceremony was about to start. And she was standing in the rear, near the huge oak doors. Elaine Monroe was her name, the groom's mother, age 63, a widow, calm, kind, and proud, in ways that aren't seen too often these days. She donned a white dress that was old and faded and used to belong to her mother. 3 times, the seams had been restitched. The lace on the sleeves was becoming yellow, although she had carefully pressed it that morning. She wore a locket around her neck with a picture of Beckett as a child. He was 7 years old, missing 2 teeth, smiling widely, and standing next to a plastic tricycle. No one had asked her to come. There was no mail with her name on it. There was no driver waiting outside. There was no seat that says mother of the groom. But she still came. Not to make a scene, not to get in the way, just to be there. She had told the Uber driver with a shy laugh, "I don't need to sit in the front row. Being close is all I need." She walked 3 blocks in shoes she hadn't worn in 10 years. The sidewalk ripped the thin leather, but she kept going. She had spent the night before smoothing every inch of her clothing, steaming out every wrinkle, and pinning her hair just exactly. She even painted her nails the same blush color that her son used to love. She had thought about this day for a long time. Her son, the same youngster who used to bring her wildflowers from the schoolyard, was now getting married. She thought about hugging him. She thought of saying softly in his ear, "I'm proud of you, baby," before he walked down the aisle. But none of that happened. The ushers, on the other hand, appeared perplexed when they spotted her. "Ma'am, this door is only for guests." She whispered softly, "I'm Beckett's mother." Someone laughed. "Good try," he said. "His public bio says that his mother died years ago. Elaine blinked. The falsehood hurt more than the rejection. She didn't fight back. She didn't yell. She just moved out of the way. She stood silently in the back of the church with her hands folded and a bouquet held tightly to her chest. She thought to herself, seeing him will be enough. But she kept looking at the rows of guests. The dresses made by designers, the polished grins, the way no one turned around. People didn't look at her. No one knew who she was. They thought she was just an old woman in a dress that was out of style, out of place, unwanted, and forgotten. But her heart beat just as hard as it always had inside her chest. The strength it takes to raise Beckett by herself, to work 2 shifts at the diner, to sell her wedding band when he didn't have enough money for school, to not eat so he could eat, to wipe away his tears when no one else could see them. She had never asked for a loan, just being close. But today, even that seemed like too much. Then she spotted Beckett. Her child. He stood tall and strong at the altar, smiling like he had been born into the life Mom had worked so hard to provide him. The bride next to him was beautiful. Her dress moved like a dream. Their smiles were just right. But Beckett didn't see his mother as he peered around the room. That's when she moved forward. Not to get in the way, not to make him feel bad. But her heart needed one final look, just to be sure he was happy. Instead, her presence made the room cold. People turned around, whispers spread, the cameras clicked. And then, his voice broke the silence. "Get that lady out of here. She isn't invited. She's nobody." The words weren't merely mean. They were like surgery. Like a knife cutting through years of hard work. Elaine tripped but didn't fall. She put her palm on her cheek, not because it hurt, but because she couldn't believe it. Her son, her darling boy, had just erased her in front of everyone. But she didn't shout. She didn't beg. She just said, "I came to bless you, not to shame you." The flowers in her bouquet fell to the floor. And she turned. She walked back to the doors. Her dress brushed across the marble. The air conditioning made her scarf shake. It felt like she was taking off a piece of herself with every step. But just before she got to the door, she heard it. The choir is not the music, but footsteps. A different woman. Young, dark, graceful. Amara Fields. She scooped up the bouquet that had dropped. She walked over to the mother who had been left behind. And she stood beside her, not as a waiter, but as a witness. They became something no one expected. A moment that would live on in people's memories. 5. The Charleston slap. Sounds that fill a space include laughter, applause, and music. And then there are sounds that make everything different. This was the second one. Inside the old walls of the Charleston Grand Cathedral, the slap sounded like a gunshot. The choir gasped. The priest jumped. The bride let go of her bouquet. Elaine Monroe, the groom's mother, stood there motionless, her cheek burning crimson in the warm light of the stained glass. She was heartbroken and ashamed. The people in the audience didn't know whether to gasp or act like they hadn't seen it. Time stopped for a second. And suddenly everything happened at once. The cameras moved, the phones rang. Whispers spread through the room like fire. Beckett Monroe, the CEO of Finrise Global, had just hit his own mother. His voice came next, low but piercing, and frigid enough to hurt everyone who could hear it. "You were never meant to be here. You don't fit in here." He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The words were heavier than any shout. Elaine didn't say anything. She shook her lips, but she stayed straight. Her eyes were full with tears, but they never left her son. And at that moment, everyone saw it. This wasn't simply about being proud, or cash, or picture. This was a woman whose life was taken away by the same thing she helped establish. Amara Fields was already on the move in the back. The dish she was holding fell to the floor without anyone noticing. As she walked through the crowd, her heart raced. Her black uniform stood out sharply from the shiny gowns around her. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't care about the rules. Something within of her broke. The pain in Elaine's eyes hit too close to home. Amara has seen that expression before, on her mom's face, on her aunt's, about women who reared kids who climbed too high to look back. Amara got in the way of Beckett and Elaine. The silence descended like a veil. She turned her head up to Beckett. He was much taller than her, but suddenly he appeared like a boy, gone, embarrassed. Her voice was soft but forceful. "You can't see her or hear her, but the rest of us can." He blinked. Amara turned to Elaine and picked up the fallen bouquet with care. She held it out with both hands. She murmured softly, "You came here to bless him. Let the blessing be seen." Elaine took the flowers, and her hands shook. Beckett opened his lips to say something, but nothing came out. He scanned the room. Everyone who used to respect him now looked the same, a mix of disappointment and incredulity. The father of the bride stood up, slowly, on purpose, and left. The transaction, the ceremony, the past, everything is coming apart like a ribbon in the wind. Beckett's knees gave out. He fell. Right there, on the floor made of marble, in front of everyone. Not to suggest, not to pray. But he couldn't take it anymore because of how heavy it was. Amara knelt next to him in the quiet that followed. She didn't touch him. She didn't let it go. She just expressed what he had forgotten. A man who forgets his mother forgets who he is. The bells of Charleston rang noon outside, and a boy in the metropolis looked up from a screen. A mom wiped her eyes, and a world that had once cheered for power and money began to remember how strong love and humility can be. People in Charleston heard the slap, but the silence that followed changed everything. The video was online before the bride could even take a breath. A wedding guest's phone, which was partially hidden by crystal centerpieces, recorded everything. The slap, the gasp, the waitress stepping forward, and the billionaire going down on his knees. It was put up on a private Instagram story within 15 minutes. It was being filmed on screen, downloaded, and shared on several platforms within 45 minutes. By sundown, number The Slap, number Charleston Wedding, number Mother in White, and number Amara Fields were all popular. It was originally picked up by local broadcasters, then the morning news, then the news cycle throughout the world. Billionaire CEO slaps mom at wedding, then kneels to a black waitress was the name of the 12-second footage that started the viral storm. It received more than 80 million views by midnight. Everyone in the world was watching. And they wanted to know. Who was she? Who was Amara Fields? TikTokers started to break down every second of her time on screen. People on Twitter disputed about whether Beckett's kneel was real or planned. Comment sections were full of hot opinions, heart emojis, and righteous indignation. Amara didn't have time to think about any of that, though. That night, she went home to her small flat above a bakery on Beaufane Street. Her shoes were wet and her hands were quivering. After her boss called her 3 times and she didn't answer, she turned off her phone and she cried. Not because she was well known, but it pained to see them for the first time only when someone else lost everything. At the same time, Beckett Monroe was going crazy. His PR got in touch. His lawyer, his board. Fixing the damage, get rid of endorsements, give a statement. But what could he say? Every polished word they said to him felt empty. Overnight, his company's value dropped by $12 million. FinRi's global investors were scared. They put one of their biggest agreements in Asia on hold for an unknown amount of time. But it wasn't just about money. It was about culture. America had turned his moment into a mirror. Memes went crazy. A lot of think pieces came out. The kids' parents showed them the clip. It was played in sermons by pastors. Even comedians have to be careful since this tale wasn't just a scandal, it was holy. On the 3rd day, The View showed Amara's picture on TV. She hadn't talked to any reporters yet, but a blurry yearbook photo proved her name. A former instructor of hers published a touching remark on Facebook. Her old choir director posted a grainy video of her singing Amazing Grace. She was no longer merely a waitress. She was a sign. And symbols never get to rest. Staff at Elaine Monroe's nursing home had to turn off her phone. She got a lot of messages. People I don't know, reporters, sorry. But the only voice she wanted to hear hadn't called. Beckett didn't say anything. He was locked in his apartment, alone with his shame, silence, and unanswered letters. Until the message arrived that made everything different. Amara sent it, 12 words. Don't talk to anyone else until you've talked to her. People never saw that message, but it stopped Beckett in his tracks. He knew that the only truth that counted had been quiet all along, in all the noise. Not the hit, not the kneeling, but the choice to see the woman who had always been quiet. The viral storm was still going strong. But in the middle of it all, a man started to rediscover how to be a son again. The boardroom on the 40th floor of Finrise Global felt colder than usual by Monday morning. Not because of the air conditioning, but the empire Beckett Monroe had built on shiny marble, carefully planned charm, and quiet obedience was starting to fall apart. The event had gone from viral to worldwide. CNN, the BBC, and even Al Jazeera all aired stories with the heading, "Billionaire Who Slapped His Mother." But it wasn't just the slap. It was what occurred next. The kneeling, the black waitress who talked to him. His bride was quiet, and the look of sadness on Elaine Monroe's face. They were looking at every frame and breaking down every second. There was a discussion among news anchors. Psychologists gave their opinions. Famous people posted their thoughts. Hashtags including #BlackStory, #MotherInWhite, and #HiddenWorth became viral on all platforms. People talked about how they had been ignored, mistreated, and forgotten. And then the fallout happened. People that put money in pulled out, quick. The PR staff got a lot of emails from furious consumers, scared partners, and activists threatening to boycott. Beckett's face, which had once been the golden picture of success on billboards and in finance journals, was now at the heart of a cultural tempest. In one day, the stock market dropped 12%. A senior partner at Goldman Sachs called off a meeting to pitch. A big investor in Dubai put all talks on hold. And a multi-million-dollar transaction with the Boston Transit Authority was quietly put on hold because of concerns about public trust. Inside Finrise, there was a lot of terror. People started to guess what was going on in the company's Slack channels. People talked quietly in the hallways and bathrooms. In just 48 hours, HR got more complaints than they had in the previous 6 months. Some people who worked there wore white scarves. Nobody explained it. But everyone knew what it meant. Beckett was at the head of the table for the board meeting. His clothing was perfect. His eyes are empty. About him, executives moved papers about and didn't look him in the eye. Marla Green, the CFO, broke the stillness. She was a smart woman. "We have 3 lawsuits coming in, 2 from former employees, 1 class action alleging a culture of racial bias." Another voice joined in, this time from compliance. The Charleston Human Rights Commission is looking into discrimination at work because of that leaked audio. Beckett's comments about limiting front-facing roles for minorities aren't going away. Someone said a foul word beneath their breath. Marla went on, her voice calm yet sharp. "We can't protect you from this one, Beckett. Not when it's on tape, not after what transpired at the wedding." Beckett stared at the paperwork in front of him. A snapshot showed his hand in the air and his mother backing away. That picture has come to stand for his downfall. He mumbled, "I'll make a statement." Marla didn't move. "Nobody wants what you say. They want you to do things." Again there was silence. The only sound that came through the tall windows was the hum of cars in the metropolis. Charles Langley, an older member of the board, spoke last. "You were a genius, Beckett. We liked how ambitious you were, but civilizations that are based on ego fall apart the fastest." There was no applause or handshakes at the end of the meeting. Beckett came out and saw a janitor sweeping the hall, a black man who was older. For half a second, their eyes met. The man did not smile. He didn't shake his head. He basically stared right through him. And that hurt more than the headlines in some way. Beckett shut the blinds in his office. The city below kept buzzing, but inwardly, the universe he had built so painstakingly and without mercy was falling apart one silent second at a time. He grabbed his phone. Evelyn hasn't sent any new SMS. He looked at his email. There was one message that stood out. The subject line said, "You don't know me, but I knew your mother." It came from a nurse who used to work at Charleston General. She had taken care of Elaine while Beckett was in London making his first deal. The main part of the email was easy to read. "Every day she talked about you. You told her you were her miracle. She said, 'No matter how high you go, I hope you never forget how much I bled to get you up high enough to see the stars." He didn't finish reading. He wasn't able to. Not because of media pressure or corporate backlash, but because the floor under his enterprise was falling apart. But the truth, which had been silent for too long, was suddenly shouting through the hush. He had erected a kingdom for the woman who made him king, but there was no throne. And suddenly, everything he touched turned to dust. She never wanted to be in the spotlight. Kaya Daniels came to work that day like she did every other day. Quiet, focused, and with a shift between her early morning lessons and a long bus commute home. In a room full of people, she was nobody. By design, it's not visible, up to the slap. Until there was silence after that. Until the words she didn't mean to say came out of her mouth like fire. "Sir, you can't hit the woman who carried you." And just like that, everyone noticed her. Kaya did not appear like a viral sensation at all when she sat across from journalist Lila Grant in a modest studio set up inside a Charleston community center. Her hair was in a bun, and she wore a basic navy shirt. No makeup, no training for the media, only the truth. Lila smiled and moved her mic around. "Millions of people saw that moment, Kaya. They saw you stand up to one of the most powerful men in America. Why did you talk?" Kaya looked at the camera light and then at her hands. "I didn't plan to," she responded in a calm voice. "But I saw his mom, and she looked just like mine. Not in her face, but in her pain. That kind that doesn't talk. The kind that black women carry with them for their whole lives and still grin through." She stopped. "I've worked as a waiter at weddings, galas, and fundraisers. People don't see us. We fill up champagne again. We take away platters. We go away. But on that day, I couldn't get away." Lila leaned in. "Did you know who Beckett Monroe was?" "Of course," Kaya answered with a soft giggle. "We all knew. His face is on buildings and buses. Be the future is the motto of his business. But what kind of future hits the past in public?" The room became quiet. People on the internet called her the girl with the fire eyes. Comment sections argued about her tone, her bravery, and her daring. People had called her many things, from an angel of justice to a waitress who didn't know her place. But Kaya understood where she belonged. It was exactly where she had been, between a man's pride and a mother's honor. "Did you really think he would kneel?" "Why?" Lila asked. Kaya shook her head slowly. "No, but I wanted him to feel something. Anything." At that moment, it wasn't only about his mother. It was about every black woman who raised a son on her alone, and every mother who gave everything but received nothing back but silence. She leaned forward, her eyes clear. "My mom cleaned hotel rooms 6 days a week, still does. She would leave work without pay every time I got sick, be written up, and said she didn't care. Because her kid was the most important thing to her. That's what moms do. Elaine Monroe did that. He forgot that too." The video had gone viral, but Kaya had stopped talking. No interviews, no TikToks, no deals with brands. She said no to 5-figure offers to be on chat shows. "Why?" "Please," Lila said softly. Kaya said, "Because it wasn't about going viral. It was about being honest, and you don't make money off of the truth, you live it." The studio went quiet as everyone thought. Lila stared at her notes and then back at Kaya. "What do you want people to remember most about that day?" Kaya didn't think twice. That dignity doesn't wear a tuxedo, that love doesn't have a value, and that sometimes the person who wasn't intended to speak has the loudest voice in the room. She got up and took off her microphone. The interview was done, but the wave had just started. Kaya Daniels didn't only talk to a billionaire when she spoke. She stood up to a civilization. And many heard her. People on campuses held up signs with her remarks on them, made by her hands. It became a slogan, "So kneel." A tattoo, a moving. Young black people created the number I Am Kaya movement, which told stories of how they spoke truth to power in schools, workplaces, and families. The Charleston Post chose her as Person of the Year. Kaya, on the other hand, didn't move to LA, not an influencer. She returned to class. Then it's time to work. When asked why, she just said, "Because I still have to pay my mom rent." And maybe that's what made her so memorable. Not just what she said, but the fact that she meant it. The news moved on. The hashtags went away. The hosts of late-night shows found new things to talk about. But Beckett Monroe hadn't moved at all. The man who used to build empires with a phone call now walked about on quiet wooden floors, staring at the Charleston skyline as if it might save him. The wedding was done. The bride had left. The firm had taken his name off the masthead as quickly as an execution in a business. What was left was nothingness, which was quieter than shame. He hadn't left his apartment in days. The fridge made a noise that was louder than the TV. Plates piled up in the sink. His phone blinked with missed calls, but none were from Evelyn, not from his mom. He looked through thousands of comments on that clip, but he didn't have the guts to open any of them. The man who used to be called the next Steve Jobs now couldn't finish a single phrase. He sat down at his desk with a yellow legal paper and a pen. To those I've hurt. He came to a stop. Crossed it out. Mom, I... Crossed it out again. Beckett wasn't having trouble with language. He was having trouble meaning them. Words had always been instruments for him, scripts, slogans, and assertions. Now, these were real, weighty things. And he hadn't worked up his honesty muscle. It seemed like every draft was a lie. He pondered about the time, the hit, the look on her face. The pain in her eyes hadn't even made her angry yet, just sad. And Kaya. That girl, no, that woman who stood there without moving, no training in public relations, no card for business. She only had truth in her eyes and power in her voice. You may wear a crown of gold, she remarked, but you were born from her hands. The backlash didn't bother him as much as those remarks did. Beckett left one morning. No driver, no custom-made suit. He was wearing an old gray hoodie and sneakers that were so clean they looked silly on the sidewalk. He walked 4 blocks to the diner where he used to frequent with his parents when he was 13, when waffles were more essential than meetings. When she put her hand on his shoulder, he thought he could do anything. The site was still the same. The booths are still sticky. The same old ketchup bottles. Dottie is the same waitress. She raised her head. Lord, have mercy. Look what the cat brought in. Beckett grinned a little. Table in the back? Dottie made him coffee. Do you want judgment with that or just cream? He laughed, for the first time in weeks. The booth smelled like syrup and memories. He could still hear his mother's chuckle and the sound of the sugar dispensers clinking. He sat at the kitchen table that night and tried again. No public relations manager, no changes. He didn't say sorry at first. He began with her name. Dear Mom. He wrote down everything. The nights she stayed up to fix his ripped jeans. The morning she came to his dorm without telling him and brought chicken soup and a Bible scripture. He forgot his birthday for 3 years in a row. And how he became a man that everyone respected, but she couldn't see. It was 10 pages long. He carefully folded them and took them to her apartment. 2 miles, no safety, no limo, only sneakers and guilt. She wasn't there. He stood there for a time, as if the numbers on the door were sacred. After that, he bent down and put the letter under the frame. He didn't wait, didn't knock, did not check to see if the door opened. This wasn't about getting an answer. It was about finding the youngster he lost before he grew up to be a man who hit his mother in front of everyone. He slept on the couch that night, not in his bed. The letter is gone, yet his chest feels lighter. He slept without a screen on for the first time in weeks. Because maybe the world hadn't forgiven him yet. It might never have. But the youngster suddenly recalled how to say thank you, not to a camera or a throng, but to the only woman who had loved him before he had a name that was worth mentioning. Finrise Global was the best thing in modern finance before the wedding. It was more than just a business. It was a symbol. A billion-dollar monster built on dreams, analytics, and the charm of one man, Beckett Monroe. He was loved by shareholders. He got a lot of accolades from tech magazines. Business schools made case studies about how he led. He was untouchable to the world, a person with vision, a troublemaker, a man who turned code into money and press releases into predictions. Then he hit his mother. And the quiet that followed wasn't simply anger from the people. It was the start of a financial earthquake. FinRise shares fell 12% in the 24 hours after the wedding video went viral. It dropped another 18 inches 48 hours. FinRise had lost over a third of its value by the end of the week. People who put money into the stock market freaked out. People were panicking on the phone. Board members rushed to fix the damage. But this wasn't just about the numbers. It was about faith. And when a man hits his mother in front of everyone, you have to ask yourself, if he can betray her, what makes you think he won't betray his shareholders? Beckett didn't come to the first emergency board meeting, or the second one. They voted by the third. Everyone agreed. Beckett Monroe is no longer the CEO or chairman of the board as of now. Then there was a public statement that was corporate, chilly, and well-worded. FinRise Global is dedicated to upholding the values of respect, dignity, and inclusion. We are taking steps to re-establish trust with our employees, partners, and customers because we do not agree with any actions that go against our values. But it's difficult to rebuild confidence when the base is broken. Customers began to leave. At first it was quiet, then it came in waves. One partner from another country said there was brand misalignment. A university endowment pulled out of a 7-figure investment. And rumors spread about a bad culture at FinRise. Talk about being arrogant, being an elitist. Anonymous employee reviews spread like wildfire with claims of discrimination. Some people stated the smack was just the beginning. 3 important executives quit within 2 weeks. By the 3rd week, HR had gotten more than 40 formal complaints, many of which said that the corporation didn't care about lower-level employees, especially women and minorities. People talked about Kaya Daniels in almost every internal communication. Some others hailed her a hero. People said she was the mirror FinRise had been avoiding for too long. Beckett was in a city where his name used to unlock every door, but now it got him kicked out of eateries. Yes, he had built an empire. But he had made it with places where he couldn't see. With pride that isn't held back. Believing that success made up for the things you left behind. And suddenly it was falling apart. The press stopped using adjectives like innovator and started using words like responsibility. Late-night shows made fun of his story. Don't go full Beckett is a new expression that came from social media. At the main office of FinRise, people were very unhappy. First, the corporation quietly announced layoffs, and then they did it more openly. For the first time in 4 years, their worth fell below $3 billion. One investor told Bloomberg, FinRise didn't fail because of bad technology. It fell because the person in charge lost how to be a person. And maybe the worst thing that happened was when the foundation Beckett had once given money to, the Future Leaders Fellowship, said it was cutting ties with his name. They wrote in a press statement that went viral. We think that leadership starts at home. We respect mothers. We lift women up. We also don't agree that power makes cruelty okay. Beckett read that one sentence. No buffer for PR, no boardroom full with loyalists. Just him and the truth. FinRise wasn't just falling apart. People remembered it not for what it built, but for what it broke. And there was no amount of coding or money that could change that. Beckett Monroe finally realized what legacy meant not as an accomplishment, but as a mirror. People don't recall how much money you made in the end. They recall how you treated people who just had love to give you. The demise of FinRise didn't mean the end of Beckett Monroe, but it was the start of something else, something that goes slower, something less noisy, more real. Getting back. It didn't come with a round of applause. It didn't come through the news. It came in the smallest locations, far away from the metropolis where his name used to be on LED billboards. It all started one frosty morning at the edge of a North Charleston neighborhood that no one remembers. Beckett was outside of a community center. No team with cameras, not a group of people. A guy in jeans and a sweatshirt was carrying a cup of coffee he didn't really want to drink. They were doing a food drive inside. He had called ahead and asked whether they needed volunteers without giving his identity. They agreed. They always needed help, especially from people who were on time. He went inside and didn't announce who he was. I just started putting things in bags. Peanut butter, rice, canned beans, and formula. No one knew who he was. Or maybe they did and didn't care. He didn't say anything that first day. He paid attention. For the woman who ran the facility on a budget that barely paid for the lights, To the older man who used to teach arithmetic but now makes soup. To the girl who made him think of Kaya, sharp eyes, steady hands, and a voice that was too frequently ignored. Beckett stayed all day. The director gave him a clipboard and asked, "Are you coming back?" He nodded. "Yes. Sure, I'd want to." After that, he came back every week. He never said anything about it, never called the news, just got here. He cleaned the floors. He helped a boy fix his laptop so he could go to school. He figured out how to make a supper for 4 people with $5. And little by little, something inside him began to melt. He walked more often, drove less, ate at diners that had plastic menus, talked to those who didn't care about exit plans or stock options. People who only wanted to be noticed. He observed a woman going through the trash one night as he was cleaning up the rear lot of the center. She had on a purple coat that was getting old and was humming a hymn. Her hands were shaking. He carefully walked over to her, gave her a hot meal and a bottle of water. She gave him a look, and her eyes narrowed. "You're the one in the video." He nodded. For a while, she didn't say anything. "I just took the sandwich and sat down on the curb." "You hurt your mama bad," she said. "I know." She chewed into it, slowly chewed. "Have you done anything about it yet?" Beckett was next to her. "I'm trying." She stared up at the night sky. "Well," she responded, "it's better to try than to run, but it doesn't nourish the spirit." After that, she gave him half of the sandwich. He didn't want to, but he did. Because maybe that's where atonement begins, on a freezing sidewalk, sharing bread with someone you used to stroll by. Beckett began going to shelters after that night. Not only to give, to hear, to study. He saw how many mothers lived in the shadows of other people's achievements. Women who worked extra shifts and still went unnoticed. Women who reared kids who became rich and never looked back. He could see his mother's face in all of them. That's when the notion came to mind. Not a return. A change. He used the last of his severance pay from FinRise to buy a rundown building on the east side of the city. He got support from the same folks he had met on those mornings while he was collecting food. Plumbers, artists who paint, people who work with wood. Some had records, some have lost everything they had. They all had something left to give. He called it the Elaine House. Not a place to stay. A safe place. For moms. For moms who had been ignored, hurt, or pushed away by the children they had given everything to. There weren't any marble flooring, no chrome logos. But it was warm. Rooms for taking care of kids, training for a job, meals that are hot, a wall with pictures of moms and their kids all over it. Some people are smiling, some people don't. Everything's seen. Beckett was in charge of the front desk, took out the trash. He went to counseling training so he could do more than just say he was sorry. He only told his story when someone asked. When people questioned him why he made this area, he responded, "Because I needed it too." Redemption didn't make things better. It didn't bring Evelyn back. It didn't take away the slap. But it gave that moment a purpose to be more than just humiliation. It made agony into something beneficial. And every time a mother stepped into the Elaine house and was treated with respect, Beckett felt it. Like the smell of soup and washing soap carried a gentle forgiveness. He was no longer in charge of anything. A man is reconstructing the planet, one individual at a time. Beckett Monroe sat in a folding chair in the old warehouse on East Bay Street. It didn't feel like a press event. It felt like coming home. For years, no one had lived in the building. There are broken windows, paint that is flaking, and graffiti on the loading dock. Now, volunteers painted the outside wall bright white, and in big gold letters above the door, someone had written, "The White Scarf Foundation." He called it after a piece of cloth that his mother used to wear. He had always thought of a white scarf as just a piece of cloth. But now it stood for something bigger: humility, recollection, and the truth he had been running from. The White Scarf Foundation had a modest but brave goal: to recognize moms who carried their children when no one else would, to lift up women who were made invisible, and to shift power towards service and dignity. Beckett would tell anybody who would listen that the foundation was not his salvation. It was his duty. The main hall inside the building had been turned into a location for people to meet. There are rows of folding chairs, a long table with coffee that is still hot. A section with a bookshelf full of donated books on parenting, self-help, and leadership. A modest platform where ladies might share their stories. A coat rack with white scarves on it that any mother could take, white scarves hanging down like flags of quiet protest. Amara Fields was there on the first day. She stood next to him, not as a guest star but as a co-founder. The media thought he would use the scandal to get more famous. He used it to listen instead. Amara was the first to speak. She spoke to the throng and said, "We don't need spotlights. We need places to sit. We don't want to be famous. We need to be fair. We don't need any more apologies. We need to be recognized." People in the room heard her statements. Women who had once stood at church gates, women who had cleaned hotel rooms at morning, and mothers who had raised kids in apartments without heat all nodded. They knew who they were. The foundation's program started right away. On the first Saturday, they held a mother's market, where women who had put their jobs on hold to be mothers could get free fresh food, haircuts, and help writing resumes. The second week, there was a legal clinic where lawyers volunteered their time to aid women with problems with child care, housing, and their rights at work. In the third week, there was a tech mentoring program where female engineers and businesswomen taught young mothers basic coding skills and how to work from home so they could make money without giving up time with their families. The way the foundation judged achievement stood out, not in money raised, not in the news, but in how many white scarves exited the building on any given Friday night. One volunteer kept track of it. The real measure was when a mother left with the scarf and a grin. Beckett knew there would be problems. He thought critics would claim he was doing it for show, but what he found instead was something he hadn't been looking for: thankfulness based on fairness. On the first day, a mother called Rosa came in and sat down quietly in the circle. She kept her shawl tight. She added, "This is the first time someone has looked at me and not through me." That sentence made him feel small. As the organization grew, they worked with schools in Charleston and other counties. Not pupils with great test scores, but first-generation college students whose mothers had to miss work twice a week to work in a restaurant. They started the Mother's Voice lecture series, which invited women to talk about what they needed, not what other people thought they needed. Finrise had fallen apart. His dominion had fallen apart. But the White Scarf Foundation was where he built his house. The old goal of making money and growing was replaced by something deeper and slower: healing and being present. Beckett walked down the hall one night after it had closed. He stared at the wall with pictures of moms and children, women in white scarves, and fathers holding hands. He also saw a picture of Amara, who was smiling and proud. He looked at a picture of his mother, Elaine Monroe, standing under an almond tree with a white scarf blowing in the wind. And he knew that it takes time to heal, but it starts when you name what was wrong. He sat at a folding table and filled out a document where people could sign up to help. 1 hour a week. Only one. He put his name on the line. It was bizarre. It felt good. When the invisible are seen, the world changes, became the foundation's motto. Not because the visible are made tiny, but because everyone is welcome. The White Scarf Foundation was more than just a sign. It was a movement. A door opened for the forgotten to walk through and for those who had forgotten to finally kneel not in shame, but in service. The boardroom no longer defined Beckett Monroe in the end. The hallways of that foundation and the white scarves wafting softly in the late afternoon breeze outside the warehouse door identified him. And the whole world saw. Not to judge, but to learn this time. Beckett Monroe used to live in a penthouse on the top floor of a high-rise building that looked out over Charleston Harbor. The floors were made of Italian marble that was brought in. The closets were bigger than typical studio units. He ordered food most nights, but the fridge was always full. Back then, everything shone, yet nothing really shined. He used to think he was worth anything based on stock tickers, special invitations, and the size of a headline. His language had become luxury. He wore it like armor until the smack took it all off. His days began differently now. Not with emails or cappuccino machines that go off on timers, but with a tranquil walk by the White Scarf Foundation's garden. He took care of the soil every morning, cutting back the roses that his mother used to love. His hands, which used to sign agreements worth millions, suddenly have calluses from digging, planting, and helping without expecting anything in return. He realized that legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die, it's what you give away when you're still alive. One Friday night, a boy called Matteo came up to him outside the foundation, 12 years old. Be quiet, anxious. He held a piece of paper in his hand, an essay about the woman who reared him. His mom worked 2 jobs, never missed a single parent-teacher meeting, and taught him how to say, "thank you," before he learned how to spell it. Beckett read it out loud to the small group that had gathered. His voice broke halfway through. Matteo's mother hugged him after he was done and dried her eyes. Beckett stood back with his hands in his pockets and watched them. No pictures, no press, just a moment that was important. He made a choice that night. He got rid of the penthouse, in a quiet way, no news stories, there aren't any real estate gossip columns. He used the money to buy 3 properties in Charleston and turned them into temporary homes for moms who were leaving abusive relationships, being evicted, or losing their jobs. The names of the houses were Rose, Dahlia, and Jasmine, which are all flowers. And there was a simple message on each entrance. You are not alone. Amara was the one who challenged him one day as they walked down East Bay after a board meeting. Do you ever miss it? She inquired, gazing at the skyline. He thought about it. The people, the trip, the power. He answered, no. I miss my mom's Sunday stew more than anything else. They laughed, but they realized what the words really meant. A mother called Teresa hung a picture of her kids next to a broken mirror in one of the new dwellings. She said to Beckett, I never thought a man in a suit would care if my roof leaked. But then one came with a toolbox. Beckett has learnt that expensive things are loud, but what about legacy? The legacy is quiet. It whispers through the halls of a shelter, through the sound of a child laughing at dinner, and through the sound of a lock clicking on a door that a mother feared she would never possess again. He had a lot of money. He was well known. But none of that had brought him peace. Watching mothers pass through doors he had helped open gave him serenity, doors that led to jobs, safety, and rest. Eventually, Beckett's name stopped being in the headlines. People who put money into things moved on. The analysts forgot about him. He was thankful for it. People who used to be invisible in hotel kitchens, school hallways, and dilapidated apartments started to remember his face not as the man who slapped his mother, but as the man who learnt to kneel. He went to see his mother's grave one spring afternoon. Above her tomb, the almond tree flowered. He sat next to the stone with a white scarf nicely folded in his hand. I traded gold for dirt, he said softly. And I've never felt so rich. The wind moved. Almond petals swirled around him. He could buy silence with money, but only legacy had shown him how to pay attention. We live in a time when a claim is louder than the truth, when power often speaks louder than knowledge, and when the limelight is mistaken for purpose. But Beckett Monroe's story, like many others that are concealed under the brightness of wealth and the stillness of shame, reminds us that humility is what brings about redemption, not headlines. One slap was all it took to break the spell. Kaya's voice could shake a room full of power and pride. One mother's silence speaks louder than any criticism. And one broken son who ultimately learns that kneeling isn't a sign of weakness. It's the first step toward understanding. This isn't just a tale of a wedding that went wrong. It's not just a scandal. It's a mirror. A mirror for every son who hasn't called his mom. Every girl who feels like no one sees her in a world that values looks above personality. Everyone who has ever put image before honesty. It's a story about remembering who brought you up, not simply with food and clothes, but also with prayers said behind closed doors, with sacrifices that never made it to the spreadsheets, with love that only wanted to be remembered and nothing else. And sure, it is a story about Black people. A story about not being seen in rooms you helped make, about being told you belong in the shadows yet the light wouldn't even be there without you. Kaya's bravery was more than just resistance. It was the voice of many generations who had waited long enough to be heard. This story encourages you to stop if you've ever ignored someone because of where they came from, the color of their skin, the state of their clothes, or the way they talked. To see again. You never know when the individual you ignore today will remind you of your own humanity tomorrow. We can't always fix our faults. Some apologies are too late. Some doors never open again. But we may use our shortcomings to help others find their way. Like the White Scarf Foundation, which was not born out of ambition but out of regret. Kaya now speaks from a stage instead of behind a tray, helping those who have been made to feel invisible find their voice again. And like Beckett, who gave up luxury for legacy and finally found peace not in penthouses, but in purpose. If this story touched you, please share it. Not for views, not for likes. But someone out there, maybe a son, maybe a CEO, maybe a mother sitting by the phone will know that they are not alone, will feel like they are remembered, will feel adored. Sign up for Hidden Worth to get more stories that dig deep and discover the soul. Because every life is important. And sometimes, it takes one tragic moment to remind the world that merit was never supposed to be hidden. Thanks for listening. And if your mom is still around, call her. Not tomorrow. Today.